Hi everyone, and welcome to this workshop series on branding. My name is Chris Converse, and today we'll be creating a unique visual element for our logo design. Some of the most iconic brands have a story about their unique design element, like the FedEx arrow or the 31 flavors of Baskin-Robbins. Vio's logo represents the digital conversion of analog signals to digital, which I think is really cool. And the smile in Amazon's logo is actually offering you everything from A to Z. And then there's Apple's logo with a digital bite taken out of it. Well, according to the designer, that really wasn't the meaning of the bite, but it does make for a great story. Anyway, we're going to be creating a unique mark for Altura Athletics, and we're going to be making the A look like the legs of a runner. We were inspired by images of runners when we were doing some of our brand searching, and I especially like the runners that we used in the first workshop of the mood board. So we're going to be using Illustrator to break apart type, create custom shapes, and finalize this logo design. So I hope this sounds interesting, and if so, sit back and let me demonstrate this. Or if you'd like to follow along, download the project files and let's get started. Now, if you're going to be following along with me in this workshop, you'll need to be logged into your Creative Cloud account. And the services we're going to be using are Adobe Stock, if you want to use images when we do a live image trace. We're going to be using Adobe Capture to capture vectors in our environment. We'll be saving those to CC libraries. And of course, we'll be using fonts to convert to outlines and create a unique element for our logo. Now, during this workshop, I'm going to be focusing primarily on Illustrator. However, there are a lot of vector tools available in the other Creative Cloud applications, and I'll mention those along the way. And so with that, let's continue on and get comfortable with vector graphics. Or if you're already familiar with vector graphics in Illustrator, you can jump ahead to Adobe Capture, where we'll start capturing vectors from our environment. In this video, we're going to be getting comfortable with vector graphics, what they are, how we can create them, and taking a look at some of the tools available inside of Adobe Illustrator. Now, if you take a bitmap graphic and you display it at 100% of its size or smaller, you'll get a nice sharp looking graphic. So here we can see that both versions of this Adobe logo look good at this size. However, the problem comes in when we want to scale this up. The bitmap graphic is tied to resolution, which means that it has to be displayed at the number of pixels that are available inside of the image. Whereas vector graphics can be scaled to any size. They're completely mathematical and get reconstructed in order to display at any size. So what we're going to be doing in this lesson is taking a look at a couple of different tools inside of Illustrator that will help us create some vector shapes. So if you're already familiar with some of these tools inside of Illustrator, you can skip ahead. But if not, you can launch Illustrator and we'll take a look at how some of these tools work together. So here inside of Illustrator, I have a new blank canvas opened, and the first tool we'll take a look at are some of the shape tools. This is the quickest way that you can start creating some shapes. So in your toolbar, we can come over here to the rectangle tool. There's a whole bunch of different tools here that will create shapes. So by selecting one of these, I can simply click and drag. If I hold the Shift key, I can create a perfect square. Or if I come over here to the ellipse, hold the Shift key, I can create a perfect circle. So these are vector shapes. So the circle has a center point and a radius setting, which creates the circumference. And the square has a center point and 4 points along the outer corners. Now, in order to see the vector shapes, you can come up to the View menu and come down to Outline. We'll do this a couple of times. Outline will just show you the overall shapes. Let's go back to View and go to Preview. So I'll marquee select these. Let's come over here and apply a color. I'll just make these orange. They have a stroke applied as well. We can see that down here. So I'll select the rectangle and then come down here, bring the stroke to the foreground, and then remove the stroke, so this is just a solid shape. Now, another way that we can create shapes is to draw them ourselves. We have a pen tool, which I'll come over here and select, and then come over here to the canvas. I'm going to click and drag once to create what's called a Bezier curve. I'm going to let go of the mouse. I'm going to move to another point, and you'll notice that Illustrator is showing me where that line would be drawn. I'll click and drag again, and now I can continue to click and drag. And when I get to the first point, I'll see a little tiny circle letting me know that Illustrator is going to close the path. Let's come up to the View menu. Let's go to Outline. And we can see that now we have this custom shape that we've drawn. Now, another tool that we have is something called the Blob Brush. Let's go back to the preview. Let's come over here, select the Blob Brush. And what the Blob Brush does, it lets me click and draw almost like a pencil tool. But when I let go, Illustrator will convert that to a vector shape. Again, let's go back to Outline View. I can zoom up here a little bit, and you'll see that that actually created a shape on the outside. Now, to edit any of the shapes, you can come over here to what's called the Direct Selection tool. What this does is this allows me to come in here and select some artwork and see all of the individual points. Now a circle only has 1 point, a rectangle has 5 points, the center and all the corners, and then any other custom shape might have any number of points depending on how many points it needs to create that shape. So we can see the Bezier curve here. I can come in here and change the handles. Or on the blob brush, I can come in here and change any one of these points. Now the blob brush allowed me to create this shape without actually using the Bezier curves or the pen tool. Now it's worth noting that if you're using Illustrator on the iPad, or if you're using a Wacom tablet, the blob brush can be set to be pressure sensitive. So the more pressure you apply to your stylus, the more your line weight's going to vary. So that can give you a lot of extra control when you're illustrating. So I'm going to hit Command or Control 0 to zoom out here. Let's go back into our preview. And so now let's talk about creating more complex shapes. First, I want to start with something called a compound shape. So I'll come in here and remove the stroke from the circle. I'm going to hold the Option key, drag a copy of the circle. I'm going to drag another copy of the circle, and I will just color this one a little bit lighter. Set that to the fill. I'm going to scale this down holding the Shift key. I'm going to marquee select both of these, and I'm going to use my alignment tools to align this to the center, horizontal and vertical. And what I want to do now is basically cut a hole out of this shape. So right now this is 2 circles. If I come up to the Object menu, come down to Compound Path and choose Make, what Illustrator will do is it will take the inner shape and cut it out of the outer shape. So now if I move this around, let me change the color of my rectangle here. Now if I move this shape around, you can actually see through that hole in the middle. So again, this is called a compound shape. However, if I come back up to my View menu, let's go to Outline, get my Direct Selection tool, I can still come in here and change the individual paths in here. So if I created a shape like this, went back to Preview, and move this again back over the rectangle, you can see that that shape has now been modified based on all of those vectors. Now another way that we can combine shapes together is using the Pathfinder tools. So I'm going to come in here and take the rectangle and duplicate it 2 times. I'll remove the stroke on these. So now I have these 2 rectangles. If I hit Command or Control Y, we can see the outline view here. And what I want to do is combine these together. So I'm going to actually select these. I'm going to bring the stroke back on because that'll actually make this a little more obvious. I'm going to increase the stroke quite a bit. So now I'm going to select both of these shapes, and I'm going to come over to the Pathfinder tool, and I'm going to select this first one here called Unite. What this will do is Illustrator will combine these 2 shapes together as if I had actually drawn this complex shape. I'll switch over to Outline mode, and you can see the outer shape that's been created. Back to Preview, I'm going to hit Undo, Command or Control Z. Now there's a couple of other tools in here. We have Minus Front, which will take the front object and subtract it from the back object. Command Z. We have the intersection, which will give us the overlapping area. Command Z, and then we can subtract the overlapping area and keep the outer shapes. And I'll hit Command Z one more time. And then finally, let's come down here and let's choose the divide. I use this one quite a bit. So what this will do is create individual shapes. Now, if we come over here to the layers panel, we can see that that has actually created a group with shapes inside. If I select the group, go up to the Object menu and come down and choose Ungroup, select my selection tool, I can come in here and I can actually access those individual shapes. So this gives us a way that we can take multiple simple shapes and combine them into more complex shapes or break them apart. Now I do want to show you one more tool that's going to allow you to do what we did with the Compound Shape tool and with the Pathfinder tool, and that is the Shape Builder tool. So to demonstrate this, I'm going to come over here and Option drag 2 more copies of the rectangle just like we did before. And now what we're going to do, I'll put a stroke on this as well, make it black. And now with both rectangles selected, I'll come over here and select the Shape Builder tool. Then I'll come over here and notice I get this pattern as I hover over the different shapes. This tool will automatically detect the different paths, just like Pathfinder, and allow me to make changes in real time. So notice that the cursor has a little plus sign in the lower right. What this means is if I click and drag, I can actually draw shapes. And if I draw a shape that combines these 2 segments here and I let go, I've actually created a shape for this front piece where the back piece is actually a separate vector shape. So if I click and drag and move this, you can see that these are now 2 individual vector shapes. I'll hit undo a few times to get back to the original shape. Let's go back to the shape builder. If I click and drag through all three of these and let go, this does the same thing as the Unite feature in Pathfinder. Let me undo. And then I can hold the Option key and actually subtract artwork. So if I come in here and click and drag a little bit inside that centerpiece, that will actually remove the center and give me the outer shapes. And then, as you may have guessed, we can create that same compound shape with the circles using the Shape Builder tool. So I'll make 2 more copies of this circle. I'll make the inner one a little bit smaller. I'll align these, then go to the Shape Builder tool, hold the Option key and click and drag in the center circle, and that will subtract this from the outer circle. Now if I move this around, I get exactly the same functionality that I saw with the compound shape. And so as you may have guessed, there are a ton of different tools that you can work with inside of Illustrator, but this will give you a good foundation of how to use the tools inside of Illustrator when we start working on the logo. So now we'll take a look at how we can create some vector artwork simply by capturing elements in our environment using Adobe Capture. So let's start by launching Capture. I'm on my phone here, and I want to capture this character that I have here in my studio, this little figurine. So once Capture loads, I'm going to come up here and tap on Shapes. That will put this into Shapes mode. Then I'll come down here and activate my camera. So with the camera activated, I'm going to point here at the figure. Let me straighten him out a little bit. And so once he's straight, I'm going to come in here and tap on the shutter to take a photo. Then I can come in here and make some adjustments. I'll start by going into the crop settings and just crop in on him a little bit. Then I'll tap over into Refine and I'll come in here and using the eraser, I'm going to come in here and just erase out all of the areas around him. So I just want a small area of the shape here. And I'm going to fast forward this a little bit. You don't need to watch me paint every part of the eraser here. And so once I'm done, I'll come up here and tap Done in the top right. And then once I'm done, I can come in here and click on the color palette to go into Simplify mode. Here I can change the number of colors. I can come down to just a couple of colors, just one color, or I can come up here to around right here. This will give me a good number of colors, I think, for this image. Then I'll simply come in here and hit Save. I can give this a name. I'll name him Art Director, and then I'll just save him to my webinar folder. So that's how we can use Capture on a phone. So now that I have that vector artwork saved to my library, let me switch over to the iPad and show you Capture on a larger screen. So in here, I'm going to load an image instead of capturing with my camera. So I'll go into my Creative Cloud. I'll go into my branding folder, and I'm going to choose this photo of empty seats in a stadium. We actually used this in the mood board earlier on in this webinar series. I'll click Open in Creative Cloud. Then I'll click on this check mark to let Capture know that I'd like to load this into the Shapes function. And then I'll start in here just as I did before with the crop. I'll come in here and crop this to create a composition that I like. Then I'll come back here to Refine, click on the color palette, and I'm going to adjust the colors in here as well. Depending on the number of colors, I can get some really interesting sort of textures and shapes here. So having just 2 colors here looks really interesting. Then I'll just drag this up a little bit to see a little bit more detail come into the chairs. Then I'll just add a little bit more here. That looks pretty good. And then I'll come up here and tap Save. And I'm going to save this into my Altura Athletics library. So from this screen here, I'll come down and tap on my webinar folder to change this to Altura Athletics. And then I can save this into that library. I can also rename this here. So let me just tap on the little ellipsis icon. And I'll come in here and name this Stadium Seats-Vector. Then I'll tap Save. And so now with this artwork saved into my library, I'm going to switch back to my desktop version of Illustrator. I have my library panel open here on the right. Let me scroll down. I can find that artwork here in the library. So here it is, Stadium Seats Vector. So let me click and drag and bring this into Illustrator. I'll click and drag to place this, and now you can see the outline in blue of all of those vector shapes. And then with the direct selection tool selected, I can come down here and edit any one of these shapes. I can move the points, change the Bezier curves. It's fully editable artwork as if I had drawn all of this myself. And so now that we've gotten some vectors from our environment, next we're going to take a look at how we can create our own vectors from images and typography inside of Illustrator. Now, so far in this workshop, we've talked about getting vectors from our environment using Adobe Capture. We've talked about creating shapes from scratch using some of the tools inside of Illustrator. But now let's talk about how we can do something kind of similar to Capture, where we can actually trace images inside of Illustrator and get some of the vectors. And we can even take typography and break it apart into its shapes. So to show you some of these techniques, I'm here inside of Illustrator. I have my Altura Athletics library loaded up here. If you'd like to follow along, you can follow along with any bitmap image. So I'm going to come in here and bring in the sneakers that we used on the mood board. So I'll just click and drag and move these into place here. So what I want to do is convert this into a vector shape. I'm going to start by rotating this around a little bit. I'm going to get the bottom of the sneaker to be horizontal. And then I'll come up here to the Image Trace button. You can also get to Image Trace under the Object menu, come down to Image Trace and choose Make. In either case, that's going to start the live trace feature. And if you're working with a rather large image, Illustrator will just let you know that this might take a few extra seconds. I'll click OK. And then Illustrator will do its default trace and then show us the results right here. Now to get to the individual settings, we're going to come up here and open the Image Trace settings. And now inside of the Image Trace panel, we can come in here and set the parameters for how Illustrator is going to trace this image. At the top of the panel, there are a couple of different settings. If I come in here and choose Auto Color, for example, this will come in here and evaluate all of the colors in the image and then refine the trace. And these are just settings that you'll want to play with as you work with different types of images. So this one here is starting to look really interesting. And so I'm going to come down here and change the number of colors up to about 65. That's going to give me a lot more detail in the black area. And I'm also choosing to do this in color because I'm going to put this on a background, and I don't want this to be just pure black and white, although that is an option that I can choose because I want a little bit of color in the image. So this is looking really good. I'm looking at the area down here. So I really like this. So once you like the image trace results, we're going to come up here and click this option here called Expand. What that's going to do is it's going to take that information and convert it to those individual shapes, as if we had gone in and drawn all of these by hand. So now if we go over to the Layers panel, we can toggle this open. We can see that this has all been put into a group. I can open this up a little bit. I can come in here just like we did earlier and go up to the Object menu and ungroup all of this. Then I'll come up here with my Direct Selection tool and come in here and start deleting some of these shapes. Let me zoom out here a little bit. Click away. So I'll click on the white, I can hit delete, and I can go in here and start removing all of the artwork that I don't want. So I'll remove the top sneaker, I'll come in here, marquee select some additional shapes and remove these. You can always hit Command or Control Y to go into preview mode and get rid of all of the extra little points here. So there's always going to be a little bit of cleanup when you're doing this. There we go, that's looking pretty good. Command or Control Y to go back into preview mode. Now I have a couple of additional shapes here. What I can do is select one of these shapes. Then I can come up here to the Select, choose Same, choose Fill Color. So Illustrator will select that same color everywhere. I can hit delete twice. Same thing, let's select this one. Same, Fill. Let's remove that. And then one more. Select Same, Fill, and then delete that. Now there is a little bit of a yellow tint, as I mentioned before, but I'm going to keep that because we're going to use the recolor feature in order to make this match into a background. So I'm going to close up my Layers panel a little bit so I can see my art. I'm going to zoom out, I'm going to go to my rectangle tool. Let's put a rectangle in the background. Let's apply the orange brand color from my library. I'll move this to the back by going to Object, Arrange, Send to Back. So I'll come in here and select all of the artwork that make up the sneaker. Make sure that I don't select the rectangle. I'm going to come over here to the Object menu and group these. Then I'm going to come over and open the Recolor Artwork panel. We did something very similar when we were creating our mood board. So what this will allow me to do is change the color of a bunch of different vectors at once. So as I mentioned, we have this sort of yellow tint in the background. And what I want to do is shift the artwork so that that yellow tint becomes more orange, so that this looks good against that background. So what I'm going to do is make sure that I have all of my colors linked together. If you go into the advanced mode and over to edit, you'll see a bunch of different options here. So make sure that the link is turned on. Then we're going to grab this top color here. We can grab any of them, but I like to grab one of the colors that I want to change. And I'm going to move around the wheel. I don't want to increase or decrease this. I want to keep this at about the same hue and saturation point on the wheel, but I just want to rotate this around a little bit to warm up those colors, get us near the oranges. Now when I let go, you'll see all of those colors will now adjust, And it looks like this is actually sitting against that background. And some of the background colors are being reflected on the artwork. So that looks really good right there. And then I'll come down and click OK. So now we have this artwork created from an image. Now let's create some vector shapes from type. So I'm going to come up here to my type tool. With my type tool selected, we want to come down and click one time to create something called point type inside of Illustrator. If you were to click and drag first, you would create something called area text, where you can actually put in paragraphs of content and wrap it just like you would in a tool like InDesign. I'm going to type in the word Altura. This will allow me to come in here, hold the Option key and Shift, and I can scale this up. Let's apply our font. So I'll pick my font from my library. Come over here to my color. We're going to set this to be black. So now I'm going to scale this up. And what I want to do is move this down here so that the type just overlaps the outer boundary of the orange rectangle. And with the type selected, let's come up here to the type menu and come down and choose Create Outlines. This will convert that text into outline vector shapes. To see this, I'll come up here and go to my outline view. Now in outline view, I'm going to just pan around here. I want to make sure that all of the type is, again, overlapping that orange box just a little bit. And what we're going to do is we're going to subtract the vectors from the text from the background. So I'll hit Command or Control Y to go back into preview mode. I'm going to select the text and the orange background. Then we're going to go to our Shape Builder tool. I'm going to hold the Option key, so I'm going to subtract. And now I'm going to click and draw a shape inside the letter U that goes outside of the box, getting the negative shape of the U and the content inside. So now if I click away and go back into outline view, we've now created a cutout with the letter U in here from our type. Command or Control Y back into artwork view. Let's select the rest of our content. Let's go back into the Shape Builder tool, Option key, click and drag, and really quickly I can come in here and create all of these shapes. Let's do the R, get that little piece, do the A, get the last little piece. Then if we zoom out, we can see that we have that shape cut out. And just to demonstrate that this is fully transparent, I'll come in here and add another rectangle to the back. I'll fill this with red, move it to the background, and if I move this around, you can see the complex vector shapes that we've created out of those letter forms. In this video, I'll show you how I use the tools that we've been talking about so far to modify the typography of our logo and create that unique mark that was inspired by the runner, as we talked about in the introduction. And now if you'd like to follow along with me, there is a file called logotype.ai in the project files, so you can start at exactly the same point here. And so what I typically do is when I start to create artwork that's going to enhance or modify typography, I try to follow some of the principles that are in the typeface already. So the letter A, for example, has this sort of angle showing up here. Now, we don't always have to follow everything exactly, but I do use things like distance and spacing and angles to modify this so that the ending result looks like it could actually be part of the type. So I'll start with the pen tool. I'll come down here about right here. I'll click once to start my first point. I'm going to come out here, click my second point, come over here, third point, and then I'll come back to my original point. I'll tap V on the keyboard to go to my selection tool. I'll come down here to the colors. Let's put black on the fill and remove the stroke. So now I've got my first shape here. So I'm going to zoom up here a little bit. And what I want to do is get the angle of this to match the angle of the A down here. So I'll move this over here and I actually got it pretty close. I can tap the R key for rotation and click and drag. But now when I look at this, if I were to continue this shape here, this is going to get much too high. So I'm actually going to change my mind and just bring this down a little bit so it's not quite as angled. Tap V, move this down. I'll just get this to about right here for now. Next, I need to decide how far out I want this to go from the overall shape. So what I like to do is come up here and create little measurements for myself. So I'm going to come up here and click on the pen tool, make sure nothing's selected. I'm going to click once, then click again. Hit the escape key. I'm going to switch the fill for the stroke, and I'm going to give this like a light blue color. Then click away. I'll make sure that I have a stroke on here of like 2 or 3 just so I can see this. And so this line represents the height of my character. So I'm going to drag this over here, hit R for rotation again. I'm going to rotate this to about the angle that I want. And I'm going to come in here and bring this to about right here. So I want this to extend out at about the height of the overall letter. So now I'm going to select my direct selection tool. I'm going to select the 2 points of that first triangle, and I'm just going to drag this out here. Hit the space bar, I'll pan over a little bit, and we'll drag this out to about right here. I'm looking at sort of the optical distance of that entire area. And I can always make adjustments later. So I'll move my measurement out of the way. The other thing I want to do is I want to decide what the width is going to be for this. And so I want the width to be something close to the width of the characters. So just like before, I'm going to come in here and create a little measurement box for myself. I come down here and measure the width of this. Then I'll bring this up here. I'm going to select the direct selection tool. I want the top of this angle to be flat. Bring my square down here, and then I'll grab this side and I'll just move this back over here a little bit. So creating this thickness here. So since it is on an angle, I might make this a little bit thicker just so it optically looks as thick as this area here. Move this out of the way. Then I'll come down here, select the point, and I want to make sure that snap to point is turned on. So under the view menu, you want to come down and make sure snap to point is enabled. Then if I come over here and click and drag this, when it gets near the end of the A, it'll snap into place. So that's going to give me my first shape. And so now with my selection tool, I'll hold the Option key. I'm going to drag out a copy of this. Next, I'll come over to the rotation tool, click and hold, and go to the reflection tool. And then I'll click and drag to just flip this shape so that it is being reflected vertically. R for the rotation tool, we'll rotate this back, move this into place. And for this shape, I want to have the left-hand side here not be quite as angled. So go to my direct selection tool. And what I'm going to do is I want to drag this out, but I don't want to change the angle of this bottom piece. So to do that, I'm going to switch over into outline view. So inside of outline view, if I move this point, I can see the original point from which I started. So I can come out here and just angle this to about right here. Bring my cube down here. Let's rotate the cube a little bit. Check our thickness. Then direct selection, I might just make this a little bit taller. I'm going to hit Command or Control Y to go back into preview mode. And so now this is giving me those two triangles that look pretty close to what I'm looking for. They're not exact at the moment, but we're going to make some adjustments as well. So I'm going to grab this one here and move this so that the point is pretty close on here as well. Then I'll come up here and grab this item here and just maybe make this one a little bit thicker. Same thing here. I might just drag this going horizontally out. And then get these to be pretty close to where I want them. And now to decide how far away I want them from each other on the left point, I'm going to come back to my square here that represents the thickness of the original shape. And I want to set this to be half of the width. So I'll rotate to this state here. I'm going to come up here to the measurement tool and I'll just divide this by 2. So I'll just do /2. That'll give me half of the size. I'll come over here, rotate this again, and this is about the distance I want between my two shapes. So I'll grab my 2 points here on the bottom one, move this to about right here. That's about how far away I want them to be, maybe a little closer. Move this out of the way. Then I'll come back here, select my anchor point, and I will snap this into place as well. So making sure that both of my anchor points are anchored to the lower right-hand corner of the A. I've got this shape over here. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this rule here and I'm going to set the angle to match the angle of the letter. So then I'll move this out to about here. I'm going to go into preview mode, so Command or Control Y. I want the corners of these to match, which they do. And I'm going to move this out to the far end and I want the ending points to match as well. Let me zoom up on here. So I'm going to grab this path. I'm going to move this back, keeping this line the same, and then I will move this down until this is flat, allowing this angle to change just a little bit. Command or Control Y, back into preview mode. Let's select all of these. And now that I have a shape that I really like, I'm going to come in here and zoom into the lower right. I'm going to select the character here, switch back into preview mode. So on the character, since we broke this apart by using the create outlines, I'm going to click and drag and make sure that I follow that original rule, and I'm going to go a little bit inside that first triangle we created. So now these are overlapping a little bit. Let me zoom out. Command and Control Y, we're going to go back into this mode here. Now I can select everything and I can combine my shapes together. So now I'll select the Shape Builder tool. I want to subtract this area here. So I'll hold the Option key and just drag a little bit. That will remove that. Then I'm going to leave it in its default state, which is the plus sign. And I'm going to click and drag and I'm going to draw these three shapes for the bottom, which are going to combine all of those into one shape. And then I'll do the same thing up here. I'll click and drag and combine all of those shapes. And then lastly, I'll come down here inside of the letter A. I'm going to click and drag around and connect all three of these shapes together as well. So now when I zoom out, I have my unique mark and everything has been separated into two complex shapes. So now it's going to be really easy to color these or even create animations, which we'll be doing later on in this series. And so now that we have our unique mark created, next we'll take a look at combining this with a bunch of different color combinations based on our branding colors. So now with the signature and mark for our logo, now we're going to take a look at creating some of our color combinations. And if you want to follow along with me, you can open up the logo signature Illustrator file. So the first thing that I do here is come in here and start playing with the different colors that we've decided on for the brand and applying them to different aspects of our logo. So the first thing I might do is select everything and just apply the primary color. Then I might come in here and just pick a couple of different colors from our library. So I'm going to start with the red here. And I want to make a little bit of a differentiation between the part of the A that we modified in the previous video with the different colors. So let's come in here and assign the bottom part the orange color. For athletics, let's come in here and assign this the dark gray. And I'm working on what would be the sort of most used full color version of the logo. And then the last thing I want to do is create a gradient from the letter U to the letter A, keeping the U left-hand side, mostly the red, and having a gradient that goes all the way to the right. So to begin this process, I'll come over here and select the letter U. I can hit Command-Shift-G or Control-Shift-G in Windows to ungroup those. With the letter U selected, I'll come up to the window menu, bring up the gradient panel, and now I'll come down here and just apply a black and white linear gradient. So I can see the color stops down here. I'm going to double click on the first one, go to the eyedropper tool, going to select the red from my library. So now I have a gradient from red to black. Then I'll double click on the black color stop and I'll sample the orange. And so now with my gradient created, I'll come over here to the gradient panel, click on this little drop down menu and come down and choose Add to Swatches. Now I'll see this swatch show up in my swatches panel. Now I can reuse this across multiple shapes. So let's come over here and select the R and the A, apply the gradient. Now one thing you'll notice is the gradient is going from red to orange on each letter. Now the way the gradients work inside of Illustrator is that every object gets its own gradient. However, you can use the gradient tool to match the gradient across multiple shapes. So to explain this, I'm going to come over here to this blank file where I have just three simple shapes here. I'm going to marquee select all of these. We'll assign a black and white just so we can see this better. And just like before, we have an individual gradient for each shape. Now if I come over here to the toolbar and click on the gradient tool, if I select the gradient tool, you'll see that each item has its own gradient, and this shows up over top of the object. I can come in here and change the gradient for each one of these. We can scale the size of the gradient. We can get the cursor just to the outside and rotate this. But if I have all three items selected, and I come over here to the gradient tool, and I click and drag, I can create a gradient that spans across all of the individual shapes. When I let go, every one of the individual shapes will get the same gradient properties assigned to each shape. And I can do this in any direction. When I let go, I'll see all of the individual shapes. So back to our logo, let's come in here. Let's select all three of these, grab the gradient tool. I'm going to hold the Shift key, and I'm going to have the gradient on the U start at about right here. I'm going to drag this over. And you can see now that the red starts at the letter U over here and goes all the way out to the letter A. When I'm done, I'll hit the V key to switch to my direct selection tool, and then I'll click away. And so now I have the color combination for the primary logo usage. So I'll come down here, let's hide the gradient panel. Let's switch to the artboard tool. I'm going to hold the Option key or Alt in Windows. Let's drag 2 more copies down. And for the other color combinations, we'll have one option where everything can be red as a single color. And then we'll have another one where everything can be the dark gray. And as you can imagine, you can create any number of combinations. Typically, you want to create a series of color combinations that are going to be seen most of the time. But you do want to have some variation for when your logo is going to be on things like trucks or clothing or anything different. So there can be a delicate balance between allowing your designers to use a bunch of different colors and keeping the overall tone and style of the brand. Now let's switch over to take a look at having the logo against a couple of different colors. So here we would have the logo in its reversed state. So down here, instead of using black, we're using a dark and light gray. And so a small color variation I'd like to make here is that I'd like the bottom part of all of those marks to be a little bit less opaque than the main part of the logo. So I'll come down here and select the bottom part of each of the marks. Then I'll come up here to the opacity and we'll come down and bring this to about 60%. Then we'll click away. And then finally, let's come over to our mark. This is also in the project files. This is the file called logo-mark. So I'm going to come in here to the artboard tool and we can explore some of the options here as well. So I'll just Option drag or Alt drag 4 copies of this. For the first one, I'll come in here and apply our color swatch. For the second one, we might put this against just red. For the last one, maybe gray. And then for the third one, we might do a light gray and maybe set the logo inside to the darker gray color. And then for the fourth one, I'll set this to a light gray instead of white. And just like before, we want to make sure we give our designers enough options for designing for different sort of scenarios. And now before we finalize our color decisions, I want to make sure that our colors are accessible. So here we have the dark gray and light gray. I want to make sure that the differentiation between these two values is going to pass an accessibility test. So what I'm going to do is go over to the Adobe Color website, which is at color.adobe.com. And then we're going to load in some JPEGs I saved out from Illustrator of these two logos and see if they can pass the accessibility test. So here on the Adobe Color website, we're going to come up to Accessibility Tools. So in here, you can play with different color combinations. You can either type them in yourself or you can load them in from a graphic. And as you play with the sliders, you can actually see what combinations will pass or fail based on different contrast ratios. So I'll come up here and choose Import Colors. Then I'll come over here and grab the dark gray one first, choose Import, and I can see right away that this will actually pass with these different color combinations, which is great news. So let's come over and choose Import Colors again. Let's bring in the light gray, choose Import, and we'll see that that is actually passing as well. Now we did just switch the colors inside of Illustrator, so if I come over here and switch the foreground and background colors, I can get the exact same effect. So this gives us a great way to test color accessibility in our designs, not only for logos, but for any of your creative projects. So as you may have guessed, we delivered a few logo ideas to our clients. So before I conclude this workshop, I thought you might want to see some of the other options that we presented. This first one here was inspired by the negative space in the letter A of the logo type. We duplicated this and rotated it to create a unique shape. The second one used the ethnocentric font, and we used it in the mark by cutting it out of a comet shape to convey speed and motion. Then we used a different sans serif font for the logo type. And then we had another design that also featured the negative space in the A, but with 12 copies in a scaling slanted spiral shape, which looks difficult to create, but was actually pretty easy inside of Illustrator using the live transform effect. So if you're interested, I'll show you how we created that effect. So over here inside of Illustrator, I have my negative shape here from the inside of the letter A that we broke apart. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by going to the Effect menu, coming down to Distort and Transform, opening up the Transform option. Now inside of this dialog box here, I can make changes, and these changes will affect the object on the canvas. This is also a live effect, meaning my properties will show up over here in the Properties panel, and I can always go back and make changes. So to demonstrate how this works, I'll come down here. I'll set the move of my object to 50 points. I'll hit Tab. We'll see that the object now moved over 50 points. If I come down here to Copies and put in 5 copies, Hit Tab, I'll now get 5 additional copies where each copy will move 50 points. And then if I come over here and change the rotation, we'll get the rotation and the horizontal movement across all 5 copies. So to show you how I created the effect for that logo, I'll come in here and make some changes. First, I'll start by changing the registration point to be the bottom center. So I'll select this here. To get the sort of slanted effect, so it sort of looked italic like the font, I came in here and I changed the horizontal setting to 71%. Hit a tab. I set the vertical to 105. For the horizontal movement, I set this to negative 43 points. And for the vertical movement, I did about 6.7 points. Now for the angle, I set this to 60 degrees, which is evenly divisible by 360. I'll hit another tab. I also checked the option to scale, stroke, and effects. And for the copies, I came down here and set this to 12, which is also evenly divisible by 360. So just by setting a few properties in this Transform Effect panel, we can see that effect showing up on the canvas. I'll come down here and click OK. And now in the Properties panel, you'll see that there's a transform effect. If I come back and click on this, we'll see all those settings will show up again. And now one thing to keep in mind, since this effect is live, if I close this panel, go to my outline view, you'll see that there's only one object showing up for my artwork. If I want to expand this and get to all of those shapes, we need to expand this just like we expanded our live trace. So I go to the View menu, come down to Preview, select my shape, go to the Object menu and choose Expand Appearance. This will then create all of the individual vector shapes. However, realize that that will disconnect this from the effect. So you may want to make a copy of your file before you expand it. So this brings us to the end of the workshop. We've created a unique design element for our brand and explored a bunch of ways that we can create and generate vector artwork using a series of different apps and services in Creative Cloud. We also loaded different color combinations of our logo to the Adobe Color website to check for its accessibility score. And so now with our logo finalized, we're ready to move into Photoshop, where we'll take a look at ways that we can enhance and adjust photography to match the style of our brand.